Glancing at the standard meta, what do we see? A giant eyeball glaring right back at me. Taking it down definitely requires some persistence. MTG Rebellion here to kickstart your resistance.
It only harmonizes if it wins prizes. Comment below as we walk through the second week of Dragonstorm Standard. Alrighty gang, we went through the last 7 MTGO challenge results and made a few discoveries. First and foremost, the format is slowing down already and we are seeing the grindy cards make an entrance to the main boards. Second, there are 3 flavors of cutter-based aggro lists that are running around. Third, and perhaps most important, Jeskai Oculus climbed to the top with 9 top 8s and 2 trophies, meaning the eye in the sky claims its throne on high at long last. Welcome to the top of the mountain, Oculus.
Hey, second place went to Izzet Prowess with 8 top 8s and 2 trophies of its own. Prowess continues to evolve, and the latest list sure is spicy. We'll have more on that in a few minutes, though.
Mono Red scorched into third place with 12 top 8s and a single trophy, leading the way with top 8s, but not converting into trophies as reliably as the first two.
And rounding out tier 1 is Esper Pixies, and oh, how the mighty have fallen. Pixies getting ranched, but Corey Cutter variants feels like sweet justice after really seasons of that deck going mostly unchecked. Pixies did snag 10 top 8s and a single trophy nonetheless as it looks to rebuild going into RC Minneapolis.
Tier 2 kicks off with Gruul Mice thanks to a strong run from Mog to snag a trophy along with a couple other top 8s. This third variant on Cutters has some serious grind to it, so make sure you stick around to hear all about it.
Oh yeah, and 6th place goes to Jeskai Dragons with 3 top 8s. This deck consistently makes up a minor portion of the meta, but has yet to find the build that will catapult it to the top. Do we know the right one? We do have a few thoughts.
Dimir Tempo takes 7th place with 3 top 8s as well. This archetype refuses to roll over and die thanks in large part to the efforts of the player's strong mind. We've got their latest build ready to feature.
Oh yeah, last but not least, Omni Combo. Ooh, slinking into the final tier slot with a single top 8. If nothing else, that should tell you that this format has 7 contenders for the throne. But there's still room to maneuver for the Brewmasters if you just angle at the meta just right.
Over in Brewer's Corner, I'll be featuring Jeskai Flurry in a brand new build for Azorius control.
And I'll be rocking 2 Dragons variants, one in Temur and the other in Gruul, as we keep searching for ways through this aggro meta. But first, let's take flight and talk about the eye in the sky that all dragons fear, Jeskai Oculus.
Crazy Morango won the 72-player MTGO challenge last Saturday with Jeskai Oculus vaulting the eye in the sky to the throne on high, and let's take a look at where they went. So, we have gone down to 1 Terse in the main. The deck has kind of cemented that you want somewhere between 1 to 3 copies, but this build in particular is focused more on aggression. It's focusing on profts as if it's the blue beanstalk that we talked about last week, and you can see that by the fact that it has 4 Spyglass Siren in the main, and we're also pushing those Dragon Hunts up to 4. Again, we talked about this last week as well, that Glacial Dragon Hunt is chart a course on crack against the Quarry Steel decks. So it's a good spot to be playing it, and right now with Quarry Steel running around everywhere, you can't blame anyone for going against it. The 3-4 split on Mako versus Siren is a little odd to me, but I get that we're really aiming for evasion more than scaling here. So that's kind of where they went in this scenario. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, though. The Siren doesn't have as many ways to push forward outside of profts. You know, in Dimir you get Enduring Curiosity, you get Kaidos. Here you just get profts, and I hope it's good enough.
Yeah, I hope it's good enough as well. The 4 profs also seems a little awkward. A lot of times you'll see 3 because of the legendary stats in the card, although I could see why the 4th would be in there. You know, maybe you want to go 4/4 Siren Mako. I don't know. But that leads me to my question. Is Spyglass Siren still necessary for this deck?
I think it depends on what you're trying to do and where everybody else is, right? I'm seeing lots of Ghost Vacuum sitting around in sideboards. I think like Ghost Vacuum is just the card that everybody defaults to when they think about how to beat Oculus. They go, okay, if we just play Ghost Vacuum on 1, they'll never get to play Helping Hand, and then we beat them in the dirt, right? But the problem is that now that Oculus is starting to focus more and more on profts as its identity with Oculus as the backup plan, you can see that the Ghost Vacuums are less and less effective, and multiple copies are almost irrelevant at a certain point. So we're kind of entering this era of Oculus where Spyglass Siren is helping carry the aggression as plan A, and it makes it necessary as long as everybody thinks Ghost Vacuum is the right call to deal with it.
All right, be on the lookout for that Ghost Vacuum for sure. Let's talk about this other deck though that it's really been the talk of the town lately in Standard. Let's talk about Izzet Prowess.
Aussie51 took down the 109-player MTGO challenge on Easter with Izzet Prowess, introducing us to the latest evolution for the hottest archetype in Standard, so let's dive in. We got rid of Ren's Resolve. We are now playing Hearth Elemental. It's kind of like Ren's Resolve with a butt at the end of it. We like it. Tolarian Terror also managed to make its way in. So what you're seeing here is Slickshot is gone. Ren's Resolve is gone. We are now going up farther and farther. And part of that, I think, folks, is the fact that we realized Harmonize is working out really well with Tolarian Terror, but even better with Corey Steel Cutter, where you can get the Whisper twice off of Terror to activate Cutter, right? So that's where this Harmonize mechanic and Cutter are just starting to go together, and that's what they're trying to do here. Okay. Note though, again, we talked about Ghost Vacuum sitting around in sideboards. There's 3 in this one. So you're also seeing a push towards that with Oculus at the top. And the fact that if other people are going to rely on Stormchaser Talent Recursion, they're going to rely on trying to get Terror down, Hearth Elemental down. You just want to start ripping apart that graveyard to make those costs 5, 6, 7 mana, as opposed to having any other out.
Wow, that shift to Tolarian Terror is certainly interesting. Not something I personally saw coming, but what do these sorts of shifts symbolize for the archetype? What's going on here?
I mean, what we're seeing here is an emphasis on grind instead of speed. Week 1 was all about speed. It was what's the fastest deck in the format, how do we close the games reliably, and then let's add Corey Cutter in so it can grind with that speed. But now we're saying, what if we just went harder on the grind? What if we knew that the first 3 creatures we played are going to die on impact, and we have to plan accordingly for that? And that's kind of what we're seeing here with this Izzet list. It's saying, we don't care. There's no mouse package. There's no slick shot. You can kill Stormchaser Otter tokens all day. We'll just keep on not caring about that. And Corey Cutter is really what we're relying on to push through damage early on, because if they don't deal with the Cutter itself, you're just getting free value every 2 spells, right? So that is kind of the defining point of this aggro build. It's saying, we don't care as much about Torch the Tower, your early removal. We'll pick up the points in the later game, and we'll crush you with the 5/5s.
Sounds like a plan. And, you know, in light of this next deck, how is there any room for other red-based aggro decks when we still have this next deck, Mono Red Aggro?
Stallone smashed through a 58-player MTGO challenge last Saturday with Mono Red Cutter, highlighting a new build to consider. So we're seeing Mono Red Aggro shift over and play Corey Steel Cutter along with 4 Calisel Sword main. I'm not sure I buy this, to be honest with you, Max. I looked at this list. We've tested with this list a little bit. It did not get amazing results. And I look at this Calisel Sword, and I'm sitting here going, why are we not playing Leyline if we're playing Calisel Sword? Like, the whole point of Calisel Sword is to break Leyline in half, right? And instead, this build is saying, well, what if it was just 3 mana for 2 spells to get Corey Steel online, and then occasionally you're doming your opponent for something of value? But it's trying to play this value cell sword, and I'm not sure I buy that at all. I will say, however, Wild Ride is a spicy inclusion over here. The ability to just dump any mouse on the board, give it haste, that's pretty decent. Like, it turns Heartfire Hero into a 5/2 with haste for 2 mana. That is a lot. That is a lot to deal with. Slickshot also, I don't know how much I love this. There's only 17 non-creature spells. That's a little rough.
Yeah, is honestly, here's my question. Let's just get to it. Is the build really just high variance magic? I mean, like, because I've seen this deck be explosive. It's certainly capable of it. And so in that case, I do kind of question: does it want Leyline?
I mean, to me, I would actually prefer Leyline over Corey Cutter, because we see all these players putting in, 2, 3, 4 copies of Temporary Lockdown to deal with the Cutter decks. Guess what Lockdown doesn't hit? It doesn't hit Leyline. So if you get a Leyline down early, then every creature individually represents a threat that they have to deal with, or else you scale it with 1 pump spell into a Calisel Sword and end the game. So it forces them to commit lockdowns on a 1-for-1 basis, instead of them saying, all right, let's wait till Corey Steel gets going, and then we're just going to wipe out 2 or 3 of these at the same time, stabilize with a Beza, and that's the game, right? So I'll be honest, I think it needs Leyline if you're going to go with Callus. I just do.
Yeah, with all these adjustments to all these aggro decks that we see week in, week out, some of the comments will talk about how it's just a 3 aggro deck meta. Everything else is just kind of playing in it. You hear that criticism of the standard meta, and we get that in our comments certainly. But with this next deck, Esper Pixie, I think the question gets pushed one level further. We're seeing these decks evolve, so let's go ahead and talk about Esper Pixie. How is this deck evolving?
Cathana Kit 26 won Friday's 82-player MTGO challenge with good ol' Esper Pixies, keeping the heavy hitter in Tier 1 for another week after taking down Azorius Control in the finals, and let's talk about why. Look at the build here, folks. Remember how we said week 1 was all about aggro and week 2 is all about the grind? Well, there's no aggro in this build. Spiteful Hexmage is gone, Optimistic Scavenger is gone, we're pushing for a third entity tracker, Kaido's back, Overlord's here to grind, we even have Grim Bobble in the main. But the most important thing, in my opinion here, Max, is we have temporary lockdown in the sideboard. Pixie players have been trying to figure out how much of this card they want to do, but when Cutter is running around in numbers and they're not diversifying their threat base, and to a degree it's hard for them to because of the low curve necessary to make Cutter valuable. But if they're going to be locked into that low curve 2cc or less for the average mana value in their deck, temporary lockdown looks really good. That's a card that they fear, and rightfully so, because even if they get those Cutters back, they're not getting those tokens back. So you do a good job of containing the Cutter deck, which was a problem that we kept seeing with the early Esper Pixie builds.
And that sort of answers a question for Esper Pixie as well, right? Because lockdown has always been this tension point within the deck. And now it can really try to make full use of it in a way. So yeah, more Cutter equals more lockdown. It's really interesting, the predator-prey relationship right there. But leads me to my question. Is it worth it for Esper Pixie to go that route, ditch the aggro package, and be a bit more grindier?
I think so, because again, right now, so many people are on temporary lockdown that aggro package is not as effective. You know, like we talk jokingly from time to time about how it doesn't matter if you temporary lockdown Esper Pixies because they'll just bounce it and Hopeless Nightmare still hits and Grim Bobble and Nowhere to Run and Momentum Breaker. Like they get so much ETB value from it, even just getting bounced with it to tab, that you're reluctant to play that game with them. But you forget that if you play Optimistic Scavenger plus Spiteful Hexmage, you're turning on your opponent's temporary lockdown and making it valuable all of a sudden, because those don't ETB for much, right? Instead, what you're doing is you're just slowing down their game plan and probably knocking it out. But this build of Pixies can play temporary lockdown without there being an immense tension point, and in a world full of Quarry Cutter, yeah, I think you ditch the aggro because you're not faster than Red. You've got to grind it out.
That's a good answer. Yeah, if you're not faster than Red, yeah, like what are you doing? And so I guess that leads me to my pushback on earlier talking about the comments that we get sometimes about it being an aggro meta. It's really not when you put a microscope up to things. Maybe on first appearance, these aggro decks are evolving to do different things in response to each other. So it's interesting to see kind of like the way that the aggro meta is kind of eating itself, so to speak. But in any event, let's push that discussion even further by going down into Tier 2. And I'm going to start with talking about Gruul Mice. Who other than Mogged would take Gruul with different builds in back-to-back weeks to the top of a challenge? Well, 97 other players tried and failed last Friday as Mogged went right through them like butter. Let's take a peek at Gruul Mice. So we're also taking advantage of Hearth Elemental here as well. And when you add that up to the copies of Questing Druid already in the main, you're getting a very grindy version of Gruul Mice. You're getting, Gruul Mice is also evolving and adapting to the grind. So yeah, week 1 aggro, week 2 grind is just coming true right before our very eyes. We've got a combined 4 burst, 2 shocks, making 6 low curve burn spells, putting in a lot of work. Removal, obviously. We're still dealing with heavy creature based meta, but Steel Cutter activations. That's the subtext here. And of course, the mouse package. The mouse package is still tried and true. We're taking advantage of that with Might of the Meek, and Cutter also being something that synergizes really well here. So we're starting to see Gruul Mice evolve also.
Yeah, I mean, we saw at the end of last season, Max, that barbed batter fist. And I knew at a minimum we were getting one Cutter over that just for the Valiant trigger, if nothing else. But I look at this and I wonder, can we afford to run Pick Your Poison over additional copies of Paw Patch Formation when we're in a lockdown format that features Pixies on tons of enchantment? And I'll be clear here. Pick Your Poison, let's say they have a Nowhere to Run in a lockdown, both down on the battlefield, they'll just sack the Nowhere to Run most of the time and keep the lockdown. So do we have a tension point here?
Yeah, I can see where that would cause an issue, but I would point to some other things as well, right? We want Cutter activations, Pick Your Poison being a 1 mana spell. Even at sorcery speed, I think is important, but also Pick your poison, being able to get rid of an artifact against the other Cutter decks. So angling in that direction as well. And let's just face it, Cutter is rapidly becoming one of the most used cards in the format. And having an answer to that, even if it's sorcery speed, that's going to become critical in a lot of matchups. So maybe the reason for that, you're seeing that split, maybe it becomes not a split in the future as Cutter decks take over. Maybe it goes back in the other direction if the Pixie and the bounce decks come back and take over. So I think it's just slanted towards both directions in the meta.
Hedge for the meta you dream of, not the meta that you expect. No. That's fair.
I like that.
Alrighty, and with that, let's talk about a deck that's ready to hedge over all these Cutter decks, Jeskai Dragons.
Scipios made it to the semifinals of Friday 82-player MTGO challenge with Jeskai Dragons before falling out of the sky. But let's take a look at the latest update. I predicted this would be a deck in the meta, and it is. It's got a foothold. It's coming to storm the beaches, and I'm telling you, this deck is going to transform more and more into like a tempo control sort of archetype. So we've got a copy of Ill-Timed Explosion. I think Ill-Timed Explosion is just better positioned, right? You also have access to Day of Judgment. For a couple of reasons. One, you're able to find the cards you need in the mid game, which is something that these semi-control style kind of builds want. And it's also a one-sided wrath when you have dragons out on the board, which are just going to survive in a lot of cases. You've got the temp lockdowns in here. It's a temp lockdown deck. I think that's just a must right now for all the Cutter decks out there. This deck certainly loves this card. It doesn't hurt itself with it. We're not playing the 2-mana Sarkhan, so I think it's just fine. We've also got on the top end Chandra and a couple of Jeskai Revelations. This card's become popular in recent days with this archetype. But it is definitely evidence of a grindier meta that we're looking at like 7-mana spells to sort of top end our deck. So very interesting take there.
So, Max, I look at this deck and I see the curve, and it curves out at 7 mana in a world of aggro. Does this deck need to lower its curve to compete in that world of aggro?
I think yes. I'm going to give like a timid yes. I believe it also has. So if you look at the curve, I think the deck is focusing more on the 2-mana value slot as opposed to the 3 as it was in earlier builds. And it sort of acts much more like a Jeskai control list. It's sort of kind of merged with that archetype because that archetype has also emerged, even though it hasn't become a staple in the meta just yet. So this is honestly what it's going to need to do to tackle aggro with any kind of consistency is focus on that. And so the reward for that, of course, is you do get to play the big mana spells. Although I'm unsure if you want that many on your top end. Well, I have to question that choice a little bit. But nonetheless, this deck is putting in some work and putting up some numbers. We'll have to see what the conversion rates are in coming weeks to see whether it's worth it to go Jeskai Dragons in this still pretty heavily aggressive meta.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting battle over there for Jeskai Dragons. I mean, the quest to find the best temporary lockdown shell is what I think everyone's doing right now because of Cutter, and Dragons is certainly in the running. I mean, the ability for Shiko to take a blown-up lockdown and go, absolutely not, we're doing that again, is problematic for a lot of people. But let's look at decks from the old era that are finally starting to reinvent themselves. We gave them an extra week, so let's take a look at Strong Mind's Dimir Aggro.
Well, in my personal prediction, I thought it was going to be either Dimir or Golgari making some kind of showing here in the State of the Meta. We saw that Dimir is the one that showed up, but Strong Mind made it to the semifinals of Saturday's 72-player MTGO challenge with Dimir Aggro. Despite the sea of Cutters and Pixies flying everywhere, let's look at what shifted. And shift it did. We got 2 copies of Corsi Revenant in the main to go along with 3 copies of Preacher. These are your life gain, I think, is one of the big reasons here. And also the renewability, being able to dump that life gain on something else when it dies. It's very important, because I really dismissed this card early on. It was a 3/3, a lot of X3s in this set, unfortunately, but with nowhere to run still everywhere, I was like, but the renewability, I think, helps make up for that fact. We've got Shelly in the main. Shelly is a good wall against the red-based aggro. It always has been classically, so not surprised to see at least a copy here. And 2 Spell Pierces, I think. Spell Pierce, also a card that's kind of like been in the shadows, helping out the blue-based decks to try to maintain themselves in a sea of we've also got aggro, but we've also got domain. We've got a little bit of control in the format now. So Spell Pierce also putting in work against board wipes and the like.
Fair. Now, I mean, I look at this, and obviously it's been Dimir for a long time, but we're seeing so much aggro. We're seeing so much aggression. Are we at the point where we need to just start looking at mono black again and say, okay, we've got Revenants, we've got Preachers, we've got Shellys, we've got so much life gain just built into this removal package. Can we just get to mono black, or are we missing something there?
I know one person in the chat, if they're here today for the premiere or in the comments, is going to let us know. And that's, shout out to Vixen Severe, that mono black guy in the Rebellion Discord, who's probably going to want me to say yes to this question, but, with the mono black love. But I think, honestly, why you could do that, and that might be a viable solution. I think you could sneak in there in a few events and top 8 with a mono black deck. I hesitate to go that route personally. And I think that's because you're going to win your matchups against aggro with something like that. Maybe, the removal, the life gain. But it leaves you defenseless versus all the control, all the tempo out there. The counter spells that you get from blue, the card draw that you get from blue, Kaido, Daring Curiosity. There's a variety of new draw spells as well with the new dragon. I think it's just critical right now to this archetype. I think it's what Dimir wants to do is crush you with card advantage. I think if you cut that out, then the argument becomes, if you're playing mono black, sorry Vixen Severe, why not play something faster and more aggressive? And then you're just back to playing Cutter or Pixie. So I don't know. I personally think I like Dimir where it is, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on in another segment as well.
That's fair. That's fair. And with that, let's get to the deck that held on for dear life, Omni Combo.
Sato Yellow got to the semifinals in Saturday's 58-player MTGO challenge with Omni Combo, standing alone against the whole tide of aggro, Eyes in the Sky, Oculus being present as well. How the heck did they do it? Let's take a look. So we got some new tools here. Marong, River Regent, sneaky good, especially when you're using both sides of this. Honestly, being able to draw, find your combo, but also using it to push troublesome permanents out, being able to bounce those. That's a pretty good solution to things late game. I do want to mention here, there's but sort of an argument between Voice of Victory and Grand Abolisher in the side. This deck has used Grand Abolisher to great effect. How important is it to have an easier way to cast this? It is 1 generic plus a white as opposed to 2 white. I don't think it's that important by the time you're casting this card. I still like Abolisher a little bit more, especially because it shuts down one of the big nemesis of this deck is Ghost Vacuum, and you want to be able to shut that down. I don't think the easier mana is worth it personally. And I just want to point out again, Jeskai, the new Jeskai card on the top end, it's a 1-card kill with Invasion of Arcavia. So if any deck should use this card, it's this one.
That's fair. I mean, really, to me, the question is, can this deck reliably beat Cutter?
That's a really good question. And that's going to be a question I think we're going to ask for a while too, right? As Cutter starts to gatekeep some of the slower builds out. I think full lockdown makes this a significantly better matchup for this deck. It stands, much stronger against those decks than it did in the past. However, it still has that glass cannon feel. And maybe that's the reason we're not seeing this deck played in bigger numbers right now. If you're seeing a heavy Cutter meta, I don't think you want to bring Omni Combo. Even with, the full set of temporary lockdown, you're really just relying on that card. So I don't think for consistency's sake, Omni Combo is super well positioned in a sea of Cutter. So just check your local metas, play your Friday nights, scope out your LGSs, see what people are bringing to the table. And, if you're at an oddball LGS that plays only Golgari and Dimir or something of the like, sure, bring your Omni Combo deck.
Fair. And with that, we move on to Brewer's Corner, favorite segment every week. Let's go ahead and kick things off, Max, and talk about Dragonback Ramp.
All right. Shout out to Figured Base for bringing what she calls Dragonback Wamp to the table. So what we got here, this deck centers around the enchantment Dragonback Assault and its pretty cool landfall trigger. I didn't even know this card existed until I saw this build here. So I want to abuse it personally. But Areni on the top end, doing, higher and higher damage. It scales with the more ramp that you get to do with this deck. So I do like that in the top end. T-Tabe is here with the Green Overlord to take advantage of beans. So that cluster of cards is here at the core as well. Heaped Harvest, full set. I do like the life gain that you get on the back end of this card. So I like the ramp. I like the life gain. I think you do need life gain if you're not going to have a ton of early game solutions to the cutter decks. Speaking of cutter decks, 4 copies of Ill-Timed Explosion to help with just staying alive long enough to see your combo. So versus all that aggro, life gain, it's a reliable board wipe. I think Heaped Harvest, Ill-Timed Explosion kind of make this deck work. We'll see. We'll see. This probably needs a little bit of tuning. You saw the mana base was kind of wild, but I think it's a pretty good idea at its core.
Fair. I mean, it's an interesting concept. B, I played, what was it, 4 Mythic Rares is what it cost me to build that thing, so I'm hoping it works out. We'll put it that way. I'm hoping those cards work out.
Man, if it costs you anything, that's wild, because you usually have all the cards, like, day one.
Right? I couldn't believe I didn't have all of it. It went in, and I was just like, what is this madness? Anyway, let's get to the second deck. Jeskai Flurry. Alright, credit to Casual Spike for sending this number my way. This is a wild build, folks. If you like Quarry Steel Cutter and you want all the grind, all the smoke, this is where we ended up, right? Like, this is basically Izzet, and then we were like, but what if we played Rediscover the Way in Lightning Helix and had a better sideboard in general? So that's really where this went, and I love it because this last mode on Rediscover the Way is so spicy. Like, the ability for this card to do exactly what you need by filling your hand so you can double trigger Quarry Steel 2 turns in a row, and then all of a sudden the last turn you get to give everything double strike that has prowess just by casting a bunch of spells on the third turn. Like, that's really good. The fact that you have this town ain't big enough, also not too shabby, when sometimes what you want to do is just bounce Storm Chaser's talents so that you can replay them and get Quarry Steel activated. Same goes for Rediscover the Way, same goes for Trainer. You can see where this deck just grinds and grinds and grinds, and I'm here for it. A little side note here also, I love that there's 1 copy of Untimely Malfunction. This is adorable because it both, like, it deals with that whole cutter scenario, but also if your opponent's on leyline, it's really, really fun to just shift that on back their way. Just like, no, Calisel Sword goes back at you. So I don't mind the fact that you get a little bit of gotcha in there too. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of cool little modes on that card. It's just an interesting utility card. I like it. But let's move on and talk about another one of my favorite, well, still in the dragon archetypes, but let's take a look at Gruul Dragons. So credit to Rix, always in the Rebellion Discord trying to brew up something nasty and monstrous, and I love it. And I think we got it here with Gruul Dragons. You can, on first glance, you can see what this deck wants to do. The 4 Torch, the 4 Llanowar in the first slot, the Heirloom in the second slot. We're trying to ramp into the big dragons, and we're trying to make use of them. Just want to point out a few little things here. We've got 3 copies of the Dragonautics Engineer. Obviously, it can give haste to your board, so that's really cool when you have a dragon deck. Most of them don't come with haste right now, so that's cool. It also adds dragons to the board, so I like this card. Even without haste, dragons hitting the board are all able to crew the World Wagon. So you're ensuring constant pressure turn after turn, even if your dragons don't have haste. This is also a perfect shell for Bloomvine Regent, gaining you life, which I just mentioned in the other dragon deck. That's important to do. If you're going big, you need to gain life if you're not going to have early game solutions, a ton of them to the cutter decks. But in addition to that, it ramps you on the other end, so pretty cool. I also want to point out 2 copies of card that should see more play: Season of Gathering in the sideboard, perfect for the artifact / enchantment hate, which both those card types are out there right now. So very cool build. Credit to Rix. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and just a quick side note as well, Magmatic Hellkite looks real good when the world's playing Oculus and Esper, alright? If you want to mess with those people, realize they play almost no basics or they play 0 basics, and it's just Stone Rain on turn 3 most of the time with a 4/5 flying body to back it up. It's got some game to it is what I'm saying. But speaking of decks that have game, let's take a look at our last brew. Less of a brew, more of a reimagining. Azorius Control, let's go. All right, credit to Young Dingo. Made the finals of MTGO Challenge on Friday with this. And for those who are sitting here like, what's the best deck to play Temp Lockdown? This is a contender. This is a contender, absolutely. What you can see here is it's doing exactly what we expect out of blue-white shells. It is killing stuff early, countering stuff mid, wrathing mid, and then stabilizing and playing things like Elspeth Stormslayer, Morang River Regent, and Beza. I really think people have undervalued how good this card is for so many different archetypes. The ability to just be a solid instant speed draw spell is fine as you approach the mid game, and then late game, this is a monster and a half to deal with. 6-7 with flying are stats that basically no red deck can push through, so you have yourself a wall and a half. And again, the Pixie decks, they all rely on flyers to go through. Those 2-1s don't match up very well here, and you're able to bounce just about anything you need. So I like where it went there. The other piece worth noting is those High Noon sitting in the sideboard. If you want to mess with Jeskai Dragon Chico or you want to mess with Cutter decks, just play High Noon and watch them cry.
Yeah, High Noon, that's a card that a lot of people forget about. And I just want to say, it might be the time for Azorius control. I think one of the big conditions that need to be met in the format is having good top end in both white and blue. Elspeth, Morang River Regent, really nice top end cards. Once you board wipe, establish board very quickly. So yeah, very cool. Want to check this out.
And with that, that's going to bring us to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Now, Max, per usual, we looked at 12 archetypes in our recap. So what are you playing going into week 3 of Dragonstorm Standard?
All right, I'm going back into the past and playing an archetype that I haven't picked up in a while, Dimir Aggro. All right, so this build, nothing too fancy schmancy, just some synergies that I picked up. Fairy build, so we've got, the full set of the Dream Thief. We've got a couple of other fairies in the 2-drop slot with, the Fairy Mastermind, and we're taking advantage of that fact with Spell Stutter. Very simple. Spell Stutter just works well as a counter spell in here. Just want to tempo the opponent a little bit here. A couple of copies of Spells Pierce as well. We're taking advantage of the fact that Rockhurst Rakshasa can do 5 damage, and then Ninjutsu into Kaido on Arena. Big note, you'll have to full control post damage to be able to do that. I've found that out the hard way. We do have a couple of copies of Scavenger Regent here as well, acting as our board wipe, and doubling as a pretty darn good dragon with a very cool board ability. Also got a couple of copies of Dispelling Exhale in the sideboard for bonus. If you bring in the other 2 copies of Scavenger Regent, you can swap out the Spell Stutters, and you have yourself, a nice little package. And also Soulstone Sanctuary in the mana base, a couple of copies. Behold the Soulstone Sanctuary. This thing can act as both a fairy or a dragon with either of those packages. Plenty of removal in the early game. I believe it has a really strong mid game. That's the strength of the deck. You've got your Preachers, your Enduring Curiosities, and your Kaidos. Hit them with the 1-2 punch, remove their stuff, counter their stuff, and then kill them in the mid game.
I'm all about the Dimir Rotted build, Max, but me personally, I'm going to take things a little bit more aggressively, and let's look at Mono Red. All right, gang, so you may be looking at this going, okay, why aren't we on Cutter? Because I think everybody else is going to be on Cutter and be ready for Cutter, frankly. So we're getting close to RC Minneapolis, right? Everyone, by the time you see this, it's going to be 1 week out. That means you have 1 week left to figure out what you're going to do to plow through that giant field if you're in that tournament, which is a lot of people that are watching this. So this is my recommendation as of today in testing. Okay, you have Oculus, you have Esper Pixie in tier 1. Both of those still get punished by Sunspine Links. I think that's a critical thing to be doing right now, and I don't want to go lower for Cutter. I want to go higher and just wreck people off the sideboard. Red Mirrors also, you get to have all the removal that you had before. You just shift over a little bit and play some Abrades for their Cutters if you need it. Not to mention, this still kills Screaming Nemesis, right? So we don't mind. Last but not least, you get over here, you got cases for Grind, you've got Ghost Vacuums for Oculus, and you've got the cleanest curve in all of Standard right now. You've got 16 1-drops, 12 2-drops, 8 3-drops, a couple of Frenzies, and 22 lands. That is as smooth as it's going to get. And one of the things I look at when I look for decks for large tournaments that go 9+ rounds, what's the consistency like? Are we able to do the same thing, the same strategy over and over in a way that our opponent cannot readily stop? And to me, Mono Red is doing that.
Whew, it's getting hot in here. You got a sexy curve going right there. That is a nice curve. I love to see that. Reminds me of the early days of Arena when I was actually playing Best of 1 Magic, and that's all I cared about in deck building was the curve and nothing else. But yeah, wow, nice. Okay. I like that as a contender. Wow, folks, that's another week in the books. Look, This week, we released the first publicly available episode of a new show all about news from the MTG community. Our host, Jane of Figure Base, will walk you through all the hot goss of the week in the Rebel Tea House. So go check that out. And be sure to stop by for a cup.
Last but not least, please like, share, and comment on this video to show some support for your competitive community. We appreciate having all of you here, and until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.